Welcome back to Finding the Edge podcast. I'm Garrett Boyum, joined with the incredible Robert Fry.
And today we have on a pretty unique person in the massage therapy world in Jackie Wu, as her teachings are really something to talk about.
I met Jackie at a movement retreat this past fall that was focused around utilizing an ecological approach to learning movement skill. And while I was there, I met Jackie, and she told me about this course that she teaches called TheraPlay and how she uses games to help athletes recover from injury. And as she was describing her course, I thought it fit very well with an ecological approach. And a lot of the things that we talk about here on this podcast, such as utilizing exploration and novelty to develop skill. And I saw this as a really great way, not only to recover from injury, but also to prevent injury. Because one of the ways that we can prevent injury is to actually increase our movement toolbox and to utilize play and exploration and novelty as a way to actually help us be a more resilient mover. And so I wanted to bring Jackie on to tell us more about her course and also to generate some interest for her course, because she tends to teach internationally. And we would like to generate some interest for her course here in the States. And so if you really like what you hear about Jackie's course, TheraPlay, we would encourage you to reach out to myself at ftepod@gmail.com, which it basically stands for Finding the Edge Podcast. So ftepod@gmail.com, or reach out to Jackie at strength-therapy.com. So I hope you guys enjoyed today's podcast with Jackie Wu.
Let's begin. Analyzing. Finding the edge.
So, Jackie, thank you so much for coming on. I suppose we should maybe say how we kind of met. I met you at Rafe's fall retreat. And kind of found out that you were doing some really interesting stuff, and that even kind of worked alongside what Rafe was doing. Yeah, I don't know if you want to say anything about Rafe's retreat or start with like kind of who you are and your background, but yeah, I'll let you kind of decide there.
Cool. Well, thank you for having me on here. So Ray's retreat, this was my second one. I went to the his Return to the Source, which was his summer intensive. It was like an 8-day thing. Loved it so much that I signed up for the autumn one like 2 days after I got back. And it's I love that retreat specifically because you get a lot more out of it than you intend or you even think that you can get out of any type of retreat. So my initial intent was just to have fun and play around in trees and jump in creeks and all that kind of stuff, and kind of push some physical boundaries. But then there was that pleasant yet uncomfortable surprise of the inner growth, right? So you get to deal with a lot of the shadow work and just whatever you're willing to let come out. So it can get pretty intense in that type of way. And then you get to, open up doors with all the other attendees and making connections and things like that, which I thought was really cool. And then get to meet people like you, and they're like, oh yeah, we're kind of, crossing paths and, let's help each other out. So I think this is pretty cool. So that's the race retreats. Love them. And I'm going to the spring one. I don't know if you are. I'm like, I told Rafe, I'm like, you're not getting rid of me. I'm coming every retreat. So, but as far as like myself with professional stuff, I do a myriad of things actually. On a one-on-one basis, I work with clients as, I don't like to say physical therapy because I'm not a physical therapist. But I'm kind of like the Mary Poppins of physical therapy. So people will find me because I don't do any marketing or advertising for my one-on-one services at all. And I make them kind of go through this process because it takes a special type of person to be able to, or situation, I should say, to be able to accept the type of suggestions I might give someone. Because I work with the stuff that the regular professionals can't figure out. Right? Like there's definitely a spot for all the physical therapists, movement therapists, massage therapists, acupuncture, all that stuff. There's plenty of room for that, right? But then there's those like 1% when those modalities don't work, and then that's where I come in. So people, by the time they find me, they've done a lot of research, or they've had recommendations and referrals, and they've tried a lot of other professionals. That's when they find me, and usually their ears are a little bit more open to the things that I might have to say. So again, I'm like kind of like the Mary Poppins of physical therapy, in the sense that I try to figure out what the root cause of why they are still in pain. And then I figure out, and it could be multiple causes, right? And after that, then I teach them about it and how their body is responding to, XYZ stimulus, and how they can actually help themselves, and then also what to notice in their body as symptoms, so that in the future they can prevent it on their own and they don't need me anymore. So my whole thing is, hop in, let's kind of figure out what's going on. All right, figured it out. Great. Let's teach you how to be self-sufficient, and you can heal yourself, because that's the best, right? I want people to be independent, self-sufficient on that end. So that's from a one-on-one perspective. I do coaching and things like that too, as far as like consultations and helping other therapists learn how to do that type of thing. But I also teach courses for therapists and professionals on a more of a wider scale, mostly in Asia. And these courses vary widely, just depending on what type of topic that they want to learn about. So I teach things that are more like neuro-based, things that are more play-based, things that are more like emotional and energy-based. Some are more specific, like scoliosis or kinesiology tape, things like that. So lymphatics, gut health, it kind of goes all over the place, so brain training and all that kind of stuff. So it really depends on what people want. But I think the course that caught your attention was my TheraPlay course. It is by far the most fun course for me to teach. And I kind of, after teaching it several times, I've noticed that it's kind of like Disneyland for adults. When you go, like when kids go to Disneyland and they're all excited and they play all these games, and then at the end of the day, they're just zonked out, right? And they feel so much better, but they're just zonked out. So it's kind of like Disneyland for adults, but you get to learn a lot of extra stuff. So a lot of really fun, simple games. But what we do there is we teach people how to use different types of games for different types of complaints. So like if somebody has a shoulder problem, what kind of game they could use specifically to help with their shoulder problem, so that they don't know that they're getting assessed or treated. They just know that they're playing a game. And so magically their shoulder feels better, So a lot of the games that are out there are good kind of like as a general thing. Games are good for everybody, and a lot of people can benefit from these, but we've kind of made it so that you can use games more as a tool, instead of just everybody gets to enjoy and like a general type of help. So yeah, that's kind of mostly what I do. A little bit of everything.
Yeah. So it seems like that you're one of those people in Kathmandu and Doctor Strange, where it's just like, hey, here you go, we gotta heal. Honestly, that sounds like one of the coolest things I've ever heard. I was like, oh, what does it sound like? I'm like, oh, Doctor Strange. Oh, this is so cool. This is honestly, seriously, one of the coolest things I've ever heard.
That's awesome. Yeah, I like to do all the fun stuff, all the weird things, and because there's enough people doing all the normal stuff. So I'm like, I don't need to do that. I'm just gonna do the weird stuff and have fun with it. So it's more interesting for me.
And that's why I wanted to bring you on, specifically because I think, how could this stuff apply to baseball players? And that's really one of the main reasons. Is I think there's a lot of overlap in terms of how this can help athletes, specifically. And then two, from one of the other themes of this podcast is taking a look at like how can we integrate an ecological approach into what we do, and a lot of the things that you're describing fit within the ecological approach. Like just how you were talking about play, it's not that like, yes, we can do play and it can be fun and unscripted and not have any like main intention behind it other than having fun. But at the same point, if you know what you're doing, you can actually help somebody get better and heal from injury. And that process that you're kind of describing of having that knowledge to be able to do that sounds to me similar to what we're doing when we're taking an ecological approach. We're not necessarily telling the athlete or doing something that's really obvious to make the athlete better. Instead, we are manipulating the practice environment or the game or whatever activity they're doing to actually help them develop skill. And so it sounds to me like you do the same thing, except for help people feel better and move better and recover from injury.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
So yeah, I mean and so yeah, that was the whole reason to bring you on. So to kind of dive in more, or rather I think probably start with this kind of like, how did you get into all this? What's kind of your background, your history that led you down all these different paths? At some point here, I was telling you too about like square one. I want to kind of, loop that back in. I was looking into some of the stuff that you had, people that you've interacted with in the past. Was it I'm trying to, the pain guy, I can't remember what his whole tagline, stop chasing pain.
Yeah,
That's it.
great.
Yeah. I saw you had worked with him. So yeah, we have so many fun places that I think we could go. But do you want to first start with your background a little bit, and how'd you end up down this path and to all these different non-traditional people?
So it all started. I mean, I have an athletic background of competitive martial arts, namely or mostly Taekwondo, and that was my initial introduction into like helping anybody with any type of body anythings, right? So taped a bunch of ankles, that sort of thing, and then um, fast forward a little bit, I wanted to open up a gym that encompassed everything in one roof. So you have the regular, gym stuff where you help people with nuts and bolts and injury prevention. You've got pre-op, post-op, you got performance, like basically all those different levels all under one roof. And so I ended up taking an opportunity in Taiwan and starting a gym over there. And had that for 6 years. I lived there for 4 years, but I had the gym for 6 years. And then after the first year of that, I was able to, the gym was stable enough so that I could actually, leave the gym and start going on to different learning opportunities and that kind of thing. So I started taking all these courses that sounded like fun and were very interesting to me. And the reason why I went the alternative route was because in 2008, I got in an ATV accident and I broke my back pretty severely. And everybody that has seen my x-rays, because I haven't gotten surgery for it and I won't, but everybody that's seen my x-rays is surprised that I can even walk without pain, let alone do all the crazy weird things that I do. Like I started jujitsu after I broke my back. I mean, did the EMP that Rafe's, all the stuff at Rafe's, broken back and all that kind of stuff, right? And I can lift heavy and I can do all the things. I've run several half marathons like after I broke my back, which was completely unheard of from all of the typical professionals that had seen my x-rays. They're like, this should not be possible. How is this possible? And that's when I realized that there is a hole in the system. And it was a very big hole that was being ignored. And I'm like, well, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole and figure out like why all this stuff works. Like, why am I an anomaly? Like there should be more people like me. And why are all these people getting sent to surgery as their first option when there's all these other options that they can just figure it out or learn from somebody else who knows a little bit of something different, and they don't have to go through things like surgery, which doesn't even guarantee that it's going to work. So I took a lot of different courses, and my main requirement for the courses was that it was effective. So it's not something that was just like, it's effective sometimes, but it's like, no, I want like a big bang for the buck kind of thing. And I wanted it to have permanent results. Like I wasn't there for any magic tricks, right? So those are the two main criteria for me. And then anything else beyond that was just kind of a bonus. And then throughout those courses, I, got introduced to various movement courses as well, just because my nature is to play. So I found Rafe's course from a friend of mine who was like, "Hey, Jackie, there's a dude coming up to LA and he's going to teach a course about trees and like climbing in trees." I'm like, "Trees, I'm in," so I'm all in. I didn't even care what else was in there. I'm like, "We're going to play in trees." Done. So that's how I found Rafe's course. I've done some other courses like Fighting Monkey and things and like the GMB courses and a whole bunch of other stuff, right? Including several of Perry's courses. And Perry's one of my good friends now, which is awesome. He's a great human with a lot of really good stuff in his brain. And really glad that he like shares it with everybody because it's a lot of really good stuff. So it was just, like one thing kind of led to another and then just kind of spread out with various types of things. And then what I realized was that one of my biggest strengths was to connect the dots, right? So connecting dots and basically combining modalities to make it more effective in a different way that they hadn't seen. So it was like I was taking like two unicorn modalities that worked really well, and then I kind of smushed them together. I'm like, hey, we can actually do this whole thing with it. And I found that a lot of people liked that smushing together of things because a big hurdle that a lot of people in the industry have is how to integrate the different things that they've learned, right? A lot of people love taking courses, take 10, 15 courses or whatever, but they don't know how they work together. They don't know how to integrate them. They don't know where they come together, And so I found that was one of actually my bigger strengths is to be able to do that and then teach it in a very simplistic manner where anybody could learn how to do it. Like you don't even have to have any type of background and I could teach you how to do it, and that was from my own learning, my own learning style where I'm not a very analytical person, but I've learned a lot of courses that were very analytical, right? But also like for me to be able to understand things, I had to simplify it for myself so that I get to understand the concepts and that kind of thing. So I'm like, okay, I'm more of a conceptual teacher. I'll teach you the concepts. I'll use analytical stuff as an example if you need it. I'll give you all these references to look up or whatever if you want those things. But here's a concept. Run with it. And I believe that that's a more useful way of teaching because it allows people to be more creative and apply those concepts to more people versus just see where somebody fits in the things that so like you can have like, for example, like you can use a chopstick as a food utensil. You can use it to like hold your hair up. You can use it as a pointer. It's just one tool, but you can have many different uses for it. So I like to give people more concepts in that. So that's kind of how I came up with the TheraPlay stuff is just kind of combining some of the games that I learned from, like, for example, like Fighting Monkey and the Rafe's courses and even some of the stuff from Perry's courses and some stuff that I made up, they're games, right? They're just games. We move like people, right? And so things that I've just kind of grabbed from other people and things that I've made myself, but then also figured out how it would apply to specific ailments. So we talked earlier about like shoulder injuries, right? So what kind of games could you use to figure out what aspect of the shoulder that needs to be brought out, right? So with the games, we're going to be using it specifically to bring out the movement dysfunctions, or basically where they're struggling with it. And then we're going to find another game to help them help their brain understand that their shoulder is fine, it's totally fine, and it's safe to move in these ways. And then it magically learns how to do that because we kind of trick it by playing. Because, when you play stuff, you don't think about things anymore. Like the world kind of doesn't matter. You're just having fun, right? And then, so you basically trick the brain into doing that. And then we go back to the original game, the assessment game, right? And then all of a sudden, their shoulder's better. And I'm like, that's cool. I like that, and then of course there's like different progressions for people and so on and so forth. And there's never just like one game for one ailment. You have to kind of look at the whole body and the whole picture, just kind of see what's actually going on if you want to be more effective and choose a better game for that person. So that's kind of how I came onto that. Did that answer the question?
Yeah. Yeah, it did. I mean, at some point, I just want to go through the list of all the things that I've run across and taken and just compare notes as far as like which ones we have overlap in. But I mean, as you were talking there, I keep hearing, even though you're not using ecological terms, like it sounds like the ecological approach is all over. I mean, your example of the chopstick and that being an analogy for all the different modalities that you have interacted with is in from an ecological perspective. That's what we mean by affordances. Like, how many different ways does this thing afford us to interact with, and what can we do with it? And so that's where, I keep listening to what you're saying and thinking about it through an ecological lens too, of like, well, why is it working? I mean, you're taking very much a constraint led approach and manipulating the constraints to help understand what's going on with the athlete and to lead the athlete or the person to better health. And, for us coaches, baseball coaches, we're trying to, when we're taking an ecological approach or a constraint led approach, we're trying to manipulate things such that they actually get better at the skill that we want them to improve upon. And so that's where this is the whole reason I wanted to have you on. I mean, because the mere fact that you and Rafe, like, really, like, you were drawn to Rafe, and Rafe is very much into and utilizing an ecological approach. And that's the approach that he takes to his retreats. I think in talking with some people who were at the retreat and kind of doing a debrief, they were kind of frustrated at the lack of sometimes structure. And it's like, well, that's actually intentional, that you didn't get a whole bunch of instruction in terms of, what we're going to do and how to do everything. I mean, it was sprinkled in there when we were doing some of the parkour stuff, but by and large, it was like, here's the activity, here's the objective, and go do it. Yeah, that's why I really, again, I'm probably going to repeat this multiple times, but yeah, this is why I wanted to have you on, is to explore this more and to show people that you don't have to, like, the point that you made earlier about like being super analytical. I want people to realize, and I think this has been a criticism of an ecological approach, is that it's what we bring to the table isn't necessarily new. It just is going to help you understand what you're doing and what you've been doing and seeing success with even more, better understand what you've been doing that's been successful, and then allow you to build upon that and to do more of that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so what are some of the modalities? I know, for example, you talked about, or we talked about Stop Chasing Pain. I haven't taken any of his stuff, but I've seen his stuff. NKT, I found somebody who was doing NKT when I was in Springfield, who is a massage therapist. And so I got to interact with that and see what that's like. Are you familiar with FRC and Dr. Spina and those guys?
Yeah, a little bit of that. Yep. I haven't taken their courses, but I'm familiar with their work.
Yeah. And so I'm trying to think of who else. Douglas Heel and Be Activated.
Yep. I have not taken this course, but have, again, familiar with the work.
I mean, because that's basically RPR. Yeah. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Is that one? Okay. So, RPR, as I understand, is basically Douglas's Heel's stuff, just translated.
What is RPR
for? Reflexive performance reset.
Okay.
But it's basically Be Activated system ported over to the United States for strength and conditioning coaches.
Gotcha.
And then I'm trying to think if there's any other strange. Eldoa and the Sonoma system. Guy Voyer, his work. I think that's the last one that I've really delved into. There's also PRI. Mm-hmm. That rabbit hole was too complex for me to really stick with.
Yeah.
But those are the things that I've looked into. I'm curious which ones you have. Oh, I forgot to mention Square One, but we talked about that before.
Yeah.
Square One, I think, is very similar to NKT, but not. It's one of those things we can delve more into. But I'm curious, your like all the different people and folks that
Sure.
you've
I mean,
seen.
I'm sure I'm going to miss a bunch.
Mhm.
But off the top of my head, so NKT, it's funny you mentioned that because, and I think I told you this before, but I'm actually one of the instructors for NKT. So I teach the Asia region, and so right now doing that over Zoom. But yeah, so NKT is actually where I got my start, I would say, with the neurological modalities type of thing. And then through that, network and meet more people. Stop chasing.
Do you want to just like you asked me what RPR stood for, do you want to say what the acronym is for NKT?
Yeah, sure. So NKT is neurokinetic therapy. So it's basically we're doing brain surgery without doing the brain surgery. We're uncrossing wires that are crossed in the body. So it's kind of like if you're like, let's just say your anterior deltoid will get more, it's a little bit more analytical, right? So if your anterior deltoid is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, but your upper trap is doing the work for your anterior deltoid, we figure that out, and we basically retrain the brain and the body. We're uncrossing the wire so that each muscle is doing its appropriate job.
Don't worry about being analytical. In part, I don't know exactly who my audience is, but baseball coaches, they're used to. Some of them are very used to it. So you're going to hit a whole crowd, and they're really going to resonate with the the anterior, posterior, all that sort of sagittal, frontal transverse planes.
It's gonna click, even though I may be analytical.
I'll mix in a little bit of everything, right? Cool. So so that's NKT. That's kind of where I got my start. And each level of NKT approaches the neuromuscular system in a completely different way. So like the level 1 is a little bit more basic. It's more of just like, here's one muscle, here's one muscle, here's one muscle kind of thing. Level 2 is looking at a more full body approach where you're looking at movement systems, not necessarily muscle to muscle. Level 3 is when we get into like some really weird stuff like scars and ligaments and eyes, hyoid, like all that kind of stuff. So each level of those could be considered a completely different thing as well. So that's kind of where I got my start. I also have a background in hardstyle kettlebells. So I did the RKC and did some of those courses like the PCC and those blah blah blah, those kind of things. That was kind of earlier in my career. Perry's courses, I've taken several of those, but also because we're close friends, we've also had a lot of conversations and things and swap notes and helped each other with things like that too. So that's been a lot of fun. I've done several frequency courses. There's I think it's called like amino something, but they're basically, I call them magic stickers, right? So there's stickers that have frequencies programmed into them, and right now there's a couple different companies that do that. And I've done a few different I guess unofficial energy healing type things, so that kind of gets in the woo-woo stuff. Yeah, a lot of woo-woo stuff. I'm going down a lot of rabbit holes here. I did AIM. So that would be Anatomy in Motion. That was a really great course. I enjoyed that one with Chris and Gary out in the UK. That was more of it's kind of like a biomechanics course that is gait based. So they focus a lot on the foot and gait, and that's kind of like what they're more known for. But a lot of it's biomechanics, right? And it's actually, they've got some really good concepts in there too. So that's another good one. PDTR was something that I took for a while, and that was pretty good for a bit. PDTR is proprioceptive deep tendon reflex. That one is like super advanced neurology kind of thing. And that one is like purely muscle testing and then just like very type of stimuluses and that kind of thing. So there was that. Oh man, like there's a whole bunch of other stuff. So Fighting Monkey, took that a couple different times, and those are really fun and very philosophical and kind of like quiet deep, I suppose. And then obviously like a few Rafe's courses, GMB, which is the gold medal bodies, I think is what it stands for. So they had a different approach for movement, taking animal flow courses, original strength, a couple of Parkinson's courses that I ended up co-teaching. I went there as a student, and then I got invited to co-teach some parts of it. So that was kind of interesting. Oh man, like I'm sure there's more. I just can't think of them right now, but it's
it'll come up as we're going through this. Because like the part of to kind of go back to the play element, when I think about, and this is, we had talked about before we started recording, trying to give a 30 to couple minute ish overview of like what an ecological approach is, and how I view it, how I take a look at like an ecological approach. It is looking at how do we interact with the environment and what is that relationship with the environment. And then we use it to understand human behavior and human movement. And so where that kind of goes is to a constraint-led approach and how behavior is shaped by the individual, the organism, the task that they're doing, and the environment that they're in. And all these three kind of combine their perceptions and the actions that they do as they interact with the world kind of shapes all those things shape the behavior of the performer or the individual.
Mm-hmm.
And part of learning and skill acquisition kind of comes through this exploration, which in a way is play and novelty. And that's kind of how we learn and find out like what the edges of things are, how they exist. We perceive to act and act to perceive. And so that requires an interaction between the thing to be perceived and the one trying to perceive it. And so when I think about what you were talking about before, like how are people healing their bodies, like they're getting more information. Their body is getting more information about their environment, about themselves. That's allowing them to basically, their body is able to, in a way, remap what's going on and to have better perception of itself and its surroundings. So that's my convoluted way of kind of describing what is an ecological approach. Because I think that's one of the, where we can kind of go with this too, is like, okay, how have you seen play or integrated play? Or what are the main principles, what are the main principles that you've seen that you've been able to kind of connect the dots through all of the different modalities that you have taken that you've seen really help people?
It's a very broad question because there's so many different areas that I kind of pull from, but it's a great question. I would say the first and foremost is to see the person for who they are and what condition that they are in, and don't compare them to anybody else, no matter what the situation. Everybody is unique, and they all have different things going on. So just because 5 different people present with the same knee pain doesn't mean that you're going to treat them all the same way. This next thing I would say is to meet them where they're at. Not bring them to you and not go to them, but just meet them where they're at and see what they're willing to do and where they're willing to go. Because if you try to push people to a place where they're not ready for it, whether it's mentally, emotionally, or physically, they won't do it, and it can backfire. So definitely see like where they're at, meet them there. Also understanding the fact that just because they tried a modality once and it didn't work doesn't mean it won't work anymore, right? Because there's a time and place for everything, and modalities are literally just tools, right? Like just like that chopstick we were talking about. And if you give a chopstick to one person, they will use it completely different than another person. So you don't want to just discredit any type of modality just because it didn't work with one person for one thing at one particular time. So there's a time and place for everything, and then also a proper usage for it as well too. And then that's probably one of the more difficult things to figure out with a lot of the problem clients or the more chronic clients, just because it could just be an issue of order of operations, not necessarily like what to actually do. And then also being able to communicate with clients effectively is probably another thing as well, because I found that a lot of therapists, myself included in the past, I've learned, a lot of things along the way. What a lot of therapists end up doing is just telling the clients what to do and not asking any type of response or any questions or anything like that. And they're just basically kind of giving orders and hoping that they're going, or expecting that they're going to do what they've been told. But we all know that, not everybody does what they're told, and if they do what they're told, they might not even do it correctly. So proper communication and also helping clients understand what's happening, why things are happening, and why we're giving them the program that we're giving them, so that they have a more embodied response and answer to it, and understanding of what's actually happening and what the procedure is. I find that when people are given the understanding of the entire situation, right, they're more compliant with what you want them to do, but then also they're more like, they're jumping into it more wholeheartedly, like there's more purpose into it versus just, oh yeah, some guy just told me to do this thing, I guess maybe I'll do some of it, so because we know that the placebo effect is real, right? The placebo effect is real. And some people are like, oh, but it only works 30% of the time. Well, that's got a higher effectiveness rate than a lot of pharmaceutical medications, so we got to keep in mind that the placebo effect is absolutely real. And if you play with that and you use that, then it makes the treatments even more effective. So let's see, what else? Trust, I suppose, and fun are another thing that I think are really important with the client to therapist relationship. If everything's boring, there's going to be an expiration date, because people don't like boring, right? No matter how effective it is, if it's boring, they're probably not going to be motivated to do it, or they have to like summon more motivation to do it. But then they're like, this is not attractive to me, right? If it's more fun, a lot of times they don't even care if it's working or not. They just like having fun, So the fun thing, I think, is a huge aspect of it. Plus, it gets them in better spirits. And if they're in better spirits, it's actually very uplifting for their entire being as a whole, to help them recovering and feel better anyway. So sometimes literally just having them like get a mood lift, right? That makes them feel better, and then there's the whole trust thing as well too. So building rapport and letting them know that, hey, confidentiality is a thing. And like, there's a reason why I don't post a lot of my client sessions or things online, is because if I want to do something like that, I always ask for permission first. And a lot of people like to keep their privacy. So I choose to not do that. But that tells them that, hey, whatever is disclosed within these doors, this is a thing. This is like actual, we're keeping things between us. And then this way they are actually more willing to tell us the full story, and a lot of times the details are in the full story of, like, those are where the juicy bits are for where you want to look for the reasons why they're in pain. But also trust as far as doing a good job, right? So that's when referrals come in handy. And that's a big reason why I don't do cold marketing or any type of marketing at all, because you gain the trust through the referral network and the word of mouth thing. Like, you automatically have that level of trust already. And then you can just build on top of that, instead of trying to convince people that, throwing a ball against the wall with one eye closed, that is going to help them with their knee pain, because someone off the street will be like, that sounds stupid. That doesn't sound like it would work. But, after, if somebody has heard from another trusted source that what you're doing, even though it sounds weird, they have that trust already. So it gives you a little bit more freedom as a therapist to do the things that will work. And then I think the last thing I would say is know your limits. Nobody has all of the tools and knowledge to, quote unquote, fix everybody that walks through their doors. So if you can put the ego aside and just understand that we're all in this field to help, to do the same thing, right? We want to help people feel as good as they can, to the best of our abilities. And so if we recognize that our abilities have a ceiling, which they all do, then we need to address that and say, hey, you know what, I think this is where this is the most that I can help you with. Let me refer you to other people that I think might be able to continue your journey for you. But this is kind of where I stop. I don't have enough, I don't have enough of what you need. Right. Or if you recognize that they need something in specific that you can't provide, have trusted people that you can refer them to, so that they're not just sent out into the wild with oh my gosh, I don't know where to begin, I don't know where to look, So I think that's another really important thing. And it tells the clients that you're not trying to keep them there for a reoccurring payment to just kind of explore and try things that don't work, So I think that's an important thing as well, because we can't help everybody, but and oftentimes it takes a team of people if someone's really complicated with their case.
I found it interesting when you mentioned trust and then knowing your limits. Now, I want to ask this because there might be some parallels in the baseball slash applying analytics to talking to players or coaches. But is there some kind of relationship between knowing your limits and trusting yourself, and then trusting the other person, whether it be a client or a potential client?
It goes trust goes all the ways, right? So it's the client to therapist trust, therapist to client trust, therapist to therapist trust, client to client trust, right? It kind of goes all the way. And the only way that a relationship will work is if there's trust in all the ways between all the people involved, So if a client doesn't trust themselves to do the work that needs to be done, that's not going to work. If a therapist doesn't trust in themselves and their own abilities, then it's not going to work, right? If the therapist trusts themselves too much, same thing, right? If they trust themselves too much and they don't want to let go of any clients, like a lot of people are afraid of, other therapists stealing clients and that sort of thing. And they think that they can handle all of it. That's too much trust in themselves, right? That's also an issue, and then same thing, if a client has too much trust in themselves, they think they know better than the therapist. Then why are they going to the therapist? So it kind of goes in all different directions with that. And it's an interesting thing to watch and observe. And when you see an unbalance of trust somewhere in a relationship, speaking up about it and addressing it is extremely important, because if it goes unaddressed, then you have that problem continue. And then you're just, it's communication, right?
No, I think that's good. And I'm probably saying this more for the listeners, all of this and just the way that Robert translated it to baseball. All of what you're saying applies in a team setting, coach player relationship, coach to coach relationship, coach to your sports medicine staff, all the way around. That's super important. And then, the way that I'm looking at it, then what I really like about an ecological framework, and this is obviously, I'm just going to keep plugging this, is for me, it allows me to properly place all of these different things and to organize it and to see how it works together. Because an ecological perspective, like I talked about before, it's what's your relationship to the environment? And that environment includes other people. And so an ecological approach is really one of its main core tenets is relationships. And I think that's been a big theme that a lot of coaches are starting to recognize, is the importance of relationships. And like you said before, we need a way to integrate all of these different disciplines, the psychological element, how does that play with the physical element? And that physical element and the psychological, how does that play in with pain and performance? And so I wonder if we could kind of start to dive in a little bit to like the different modalities that you're talking about, like how do you address, some injuries and pain and performance, from like, say, for example, an emotional side. Like what's your assessment process when you get a new client? Like how do you begin to assess where to go and what to do?
Ooh, great question. The first most important thing that I do is take a very, 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 very good history, and I'll ask a lot of questions that most people probably wouldn't ask. Even if it was just for something like super simple, I'll still ask all these questions because there's a reason that they've come to me, and there's a reason why they found me, and that they didn't go to like a regular physical therapist or regular massage therapist or whoever, right? It means that there's a deeper issue. So I'll spend a good chunk of time digging through the history of everything under the sun from like now since they were like a tiny kid, like that far. So for example, like if someone's got like neck pain or whatnot, right? And like that whatever they've done with it, it's not getting any better, not getting any better, not getting any better. They come find me eventually, and I'm going to ask them everything about like, do you have any trauma with your neck, any headaches, any concussions, any shoulder injuries, back injuries, whatever, down to have you ever sprained your ankle or stubbed your toe, right? And what's funny about neck stuff, like especially if it's like on the side of the neck, a lot of times it actually is because of an old ankle sprain. Because like if you think about it, right? Let's just say if you sprain your left ankle, right? And then we could just kind of picture ourselves sprain your left ankle. So you're not going to want to put weight on that left ankle. And so you put your weight over on the right side. And when you put your weight on the right side, the body needs to shift over to the left to counterbalance that. And then the head shifts over to the right to counterbalance that. And that'll end up with neck pain, right? If you do that long enough, your brain remembers that pattern. And it's like, oh, okay, so we're going to just stress out the neck a lot. So even when the tissues of the ankle sprain have healed, the motor control pattern is still there for the neck to help with everything else. And that's something that we teach in NKT, but also it's a reason why like I dive really deep into people's history. I even go into like digestive situations and like infections and cancer and all that kind of stuff. Like what's your history of everything? Because it really could be anything. Like I had somebody who they had back pain for a really long time. They couldn't figure it out. And it turns out they had a cyst in their back that they didn't tell me about for a while. I'm like, oh, well, that's probably going to be it. So let's just deal with the cyst. And then their back pain went away, because it's like no matter what kind of exercises that you do, if you don't deal with the cyst, their back's going to still hurt, So that would probably be the first and foremost thing that I do. I spend a lot of time with that, and it depends on the length of someone's history because some people are a little bit more active, in their life, and some people are a little less active. So, and then I just kind of start looking for clues and using the little clues to kind of piece things together of like various possibilities of what might have happened, right? We're kind of creating stories of like, okay, well, I've got this clue, I've got this clue, I've got this clue. This is a possibility, this is a possibility, this is a possibility. And then I'll start to explore those possibilities with the various types of assessments that I have. And the assessments are basically just the tools that I've picked up from the different courses or things that I've created myself by combining, information and so on and so forth. So it could be anything from something physical where they like got like some type of trauma accident. It could be something where it's a habit where they just kind of train themselves to do something in a specific way where it wasn't really balanced. So like in baseball, right? A lot of people, when they're throwing or batting, it's all one direction and they don't train the other side. Right? So if you don't train the other side, you're going to get really good at one side only. So you're going to be a really good baseball player on that one side. But as a human who needs to walk straight and turn the other direction and do things in the opposite way, your brain's like, wait a second, we didn't train this. You've created us to be a baseball machine. Why are you making me be a human right now? And then that's when the things start to come up. And so there's that sort of thing as well. There's also like if people have like emotional traumas and things like that, I have different ways to assess for that as well, because that can also refer into physical pain and movement disorders as well. There's also environmental factors that we can also address. Like the other day, I was helping somebody, baseball player actually. He had, it was actually foot pain, but it was because of his elbow and then his opposite shoulder, because his shoulder that's where he got his COVID shots, and it was actually the COVID shots that was affecting his motor control for the rest of his body. So we addressed that, and his foot got so much better. I'm like, cool. Now we just need to deal with the elbow, and then everything was good to go. So it really depends on each person and what they need, and because you can't treat everybody the same. Right. So that's kind of like where I start. And then I just kind of go from there to see what they need. Some people are a little bit more difficult, or they need a little bit more time just because of their situation. And some people are like super quick fixes. So it just kind of depends.
What you're describing of like, the cyst, I was telling Robert, I was having trouble with my camera, and I was playing with all the settings, and all I had to do, it was the fact that I had to plug it into a different port on my computer. So, I mean, that's sometimes where like we have it in our head that it can't possibly be the fact that my computer was built and there might be different USB cards in. And once I recognized that, I was like, well, what if I try this? And then boom, it worked. And I think that's, when you're dealing with a complex being, it's like sometimes, yes, it's as easy as like, did you turn it off and turn it back on? Did you plug it in type of a thing? And sometimes it's a lot more complex than that. But I think sometimes we do have to remember that, because sometimes we're so used to dealing with really complex issues that it's actually just as simple as like, did you plug the thing in sometimes?
Exactly.
Yeah, and to build off that too, Garrett, remember when we were trying to figure out the live stream, and we had to use a different USB cord because one of them was supposedly not strong enough, and you mentioned to me in the past same thing. Like, I had to get a different USB cord because the one that I had wasn't strong enough to be able to stream a camera via USB.
Yeah, that's actually a really good one too, because like even if you're using some type of equipment, so for example, kinesio tape, right? So I teach a kinesio tape course that's an integrated kinesio tape concepts course, because I've taken like a bunch of different kinesio tape courses, and they all teach different things. They all teach their own system. So it's very easy for people to get confused on how to properly use kinesio tape. But guess what? Kinesio tape is just a tool. And if you understand the concept of kinesio tape, then you can use the different types of tape in the ways that you want to, right? So some tapes, the glue will be extra sticky, right? And you'll need that for certain types of tape jobs. But then sometimes you don't want it to be too sticky, right? And you want it to be a little bit less sticky, or you want the cloth to be a little bit more durable, or a little bit less durable, or a little more stretchy, like that kind of thing. So it's really like, even if you know that they need a specific tool for the job, you need to sometimes figure out like more specifically what kind of tool or what part of that tool or whatever that they need for that particular that particular job, or even like their lifestyle, right? Because for something like kinesio tape, you might have one person keeping the tape on for like 3 to 5 days, and then you might have another person who needs to replace it every single day, and then you might have another person who can't even have the tape on there, and then what do? So you need to have different ways to solve the same problem.
That's such an ecological thing. Because I mean, so when I was talking about complexity, us being complex beings, like ecological dynamics really holds that, really looks at complex systems, and that we're complex adaptive systems. And then even too, what you're describing there was like the idea of being dexterous. Like we are problem solving. Like we were designed to problem solve as human beings. And that's where I think back to the game element that we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm.
When you're playing a game, you're trying to solve a problem in a way. And so like, that's when we start doing stuff like that, and that it's unique and novel, and they're like, how many different ways can we do this? It's the same way of like, what are those Sudokus and other types of games that they, like brain games that are supposed to help keep your brain healthy.
Yeah.
It's that same thing. Like our body needs that same, I don't like using the word stimulus, but that same input
Hmm.
into the system. I mean, because it goes back to the idea that you brought up before is embodiment. Like our brain is embodied and it's designed to be connected to this world and to interact with this world. And that plays into health and performance. And I think that's an important thing that I think coaches need to recognize is how do we get them players like you were talking about before, like how do we get them out of their heads and back into the present to actually be able to interact with the problem in front of them.
Yeah.
I had a place to go with it, and then I went down a few rabbit holes here. Because you were just, what was it that you were just talking about, kinesiotape? Yeah, and then so that was that point there. Because I do want to kind of get into the play element and like what you're doing with TheraPlay and like what of the things that you've seen. Actually, let me back up because what you were describing with the kinesiotape was kind of to the question that I'd asked earlier. Like, what are the principles for me? Like, whenever I'm taking these courses, I'm much more interested in trying to understand the underlying principles because that actually allows me to go and problem solve. Whereas if all I do is I take the modality and this is what this person said and how to do it, and this is the gospel truth,
Mhm.
then my ability to problem solve when it doesn't meet the way that I learned it like greatly diminishes. But if I can understand the underlying principles, I can do kind of like what you have been doing of like being able to jump around and then actually see connections where it's like, oh, hey, they're doing this differently, but they're actually applying the same principle as this other modality. And so I don't know if that helps, like kind of what, especially on the TheraPlay stuff, like what were the underlying principles that you were pulling together that allowed you to kind of put together that course?
Um, there's a couple different ones, but I guess the main one is safety and the perception of safety. So if the brain does not perceive a certain movement or even moving in a certain space to be safe, it'll do everything that it can to avoid moving in that space, right? Or in that way, or whatever it is. So if we can expose that, and then we can find a way for the brain to understand that it can be safe in that space and moving around in that space, and then we show it that it can, not by coercing it to, but just by um, asking, do you want to play with me? And it just happens to be in the space that they thought was dangerous, then that's basically what we're doing with TheraPlay, kind of in a nutshell. We're like, okay, you don't feel safe doing this thing. All right, but how about if we do this instead? Do you feel okay doing this? Yeah, cool. All right, let's do this a little bit. And then we revisit the quote unquote unsafe thing again. And we're like, oh, how do you feel now? You good about that? All right, you're good. Sweet, we're good to go. And then it just kind of magically, gets better. That's kind of like the underlying concept, I would say, of TheraPlay. And then there's different components of it too. I've got like a few different ways where we can increase the speed of learning. We can, do different things like that. We can help the recovery a little bit faster, the neurological recovery, I should say, a little bit faster. We can, we can increase threat. We can decrease threat. There's a whole bunch of other little things that we can do along with it. But I think the main meat of it is mostly just playing with safety and threat.
Like I really love that idea and concept too, because somebody in the ecological world, Keith Davids, talked about that in when he was talking about designing practice tasks. Is the kind of the ideal place to train athletes in his mind was to create create environments that had safe uncertainty, where you felt safe enough to take risks, to be adaptable, to kind of push the edge, to find the edge, so to speak. And that really fostered learning. And it also sounds like too, that fosters healing and recovery from injury. Do you want to kind of go to also into kind of like the scientific, like what are the reasons behind, like, how does this work neurologically? Like, what are you trying to do on a neurological sense? Especially for people who are a little bit more skeptical of like, this seems like kind of woo woo, magic stuff. Like, what is the scientific rationale to kind of help more of a, rationalist, person?
Oh man, I'm probably not the best person to answer this question. So they've done studies on play, right? They've done a lot of different studies on play, and the majority of the studies of play that I've heard about or read about was mainly that play was just very effective as a way of learning and creating neural pathways. And then it was also a more complete way of forming these neural pathways, because it's not just one stimulus. You actually have to use all of your senses and proprioception, body awareness, everything, right? So just incorporating all the senses into it is extremely impactful. The part where people are having fun, I mean, that increases attention, right? And anytime you increase attention to something, you're also going to increase the neural pathway building as well. And so those are, I mean, I guess those are kind of like the main parts of play. I mean, there's always different types of play and what people consider as play, what's defined as play. I think that play is something where it's play as long as you're having fun, and you got to pay attention to something, right? And you can play mental games, you can play emotional games, you can play physical games, you can play sensory games. There's all different types of games that you can play, but it's got to be engaging somehow, right? So as soon as someone is not engaging anymore, it's no longer play and it's an obligation, right? So the attention portion of it is extremely important. So a lot of our games, they're not incredibly long. They're very short and they're fun. It's kind of like the stuff that we did at the autumn retreat, right? It's short and it's engaging and it leaves you wanting more, and that I think is another important thing, is like you stop before everybody like hates life. You're like, you leave them wanting more. You leave them looking forward to the next time, and so when you combine all those aspects of play with, knowing how the body will respond to safety. So like, for example, when we were at the creek, right? We were at Whatcom Creek and it was really like slippery and, because it's been raining forever because it's Washington State. Rafe had told us that there's different levels of things that we can do. I mean, he did this for every single event, but mostly, right? It's like, okay, there's different levels that you can do. You can either, get kind of wet, you can get sort of wet, you can stay completely dry, depends on what you do. There's no guarantees, but, just kind of go at your own risk. And so some people were running and jumping and doing flips off of these rocks without even testing them first, right? And that was play for them. But for other people, they would watch that and be like, that's too much for me. So that's not play for them, right? And so those people would dial it down a little bit. They would test the rocks and test the grip and, that kind of thing. And then they would feel more comfortable playing, right? And then they might increase their element of danger or element of risk as they become more comfortable in the play that they're engaging with, right? And same thing with the people who started off jumping and doing flips and stuff. They might have just kind of changed the way that they played because they realized their amount of threat and danger was a little bit too high. And so they just kind of dialed it down a little bit so that they were still playing and not just, trying to survive this jump. So when we allow people to do that, and sometimes they need help with it, right? So with the games that we play, we can actually control the types of risk, how much risk, and so that we can use the dialing down or up of the risk to help them learn more and learn faster and learn better. Part of the learning process is to include some amount of risk. It's that safe amount of risk, right? It's the tolerable amount of risk. Because if it's too much risk, they're not going to want to learn. All they're going to do is go in survival mode. If it's not enough risk, it's just too easy and there's no interest in it, right? So if we know how to give them just enough risk and we know how to assess that in them, right? Then it actually increases the learning capacity and the learning speed for them as well. And that's one of the ways that we kind of like play around with things to increase the learning capacity and learning speed. There's a couple other tricks too.
So to kind of follow up on that, where and how should coaches integrate this? Like, how could they, even though you're used to working in a clinical setting, so to speak, how could baseball coaches kind of weave this into what they're doing? Should it be part of the warm up? Which part of the warm up? Should it be part of what they do in practice? Should it be part of a recovery session? How and where do you see this stuff integrating into what a sport coach does?
So it's kind of cool that you guys are more specific for which sport, right? Because if you were to ask me the same question for like a general workout fitness group or whatnot, or just general sports or whatnot, my answer would be very different, right? But for baseball, you'll see a lot of common ailments, right? Common injuries, common this, common that. So it makes the game choosing a lot easier to do. And like, for example, like Tommy Jones is a very common thing to encounter in baseball, right? So then if you are noticing like a lot of
Tommy John, you mean, right?
Tommy John,
Yeah.
Tommy John, sorry.
Yeah, all good.
You're like, who's Tommy Jones? Tommy John. So Tommy John syndrome, right? So if you're noticing that there's a lot of people that are getting Tommy John syndrome, and then or just even starting to do that, or if you want to prevent it, right? You can pick what the various games for that and just have that as part of either warm up or part of the workout or whatever, and then that can be done as a preventative, right? But then you can also use these games as just something fun in training or warm-ups anyway, because the games by themselves are really good to warm up the body and mind and everything together, and the senses and everything together. And then when you have everybody doing those warm-ups as a group, or those games as a group, you as a coach can use your very acutely assessment eyes, right? And you just kind of watch how everybody's moving and what they're doing, what they're not doing. And then you can pick other games to play to help the people who aren't moving as they should be moving. And then you don't have to put everybody in the same games. You can choose, different people for different games. Say, oh, well, this group of people, I'm going to have you do this. This group of people, I'm going to have you do that. And just depending on the size and the dynamic of the group. So it's a little bit easier when everybody's doing the same sport, but if you have like some people are there playing baseball, some people basketball, some people volleyball, whatever, and some people swimming, like it's going to be a little bit more chaotic. But in a more organized setting, it's a little bit easier to do that. But you can literally put it anywhere that you want to. But in the TheraPlay sense, it's easy and convenient to just kind of put it anywhere, really. Like warm-ups are a really great place to put it, especially if you're going to do an assessment. And then you can also change the workout to what they actually need, instead of just going to do the same workout or whatever was planned just as a generic thing. You're kind of checking in with everybody without them necessarily even knowing what's going on in their own bodies, but you can see it. And then you can make adjustments on the workout to say, okay, well, it looks like, they're not moving into, they're not wanting to load the left leg for some reason. It could be from the training session we had the day before or whatever. Well, okay, cool. Let's figure out, what's going on here, and then have them more comfortable, loading the left leg, that kind of thing. So I would definitely use it as like a warm-up thing for sure to help as an assessment, as long as you know what you're doing with it, of course, and then use it as part of the training to help help kind of pave the way to turn on the systems that were kind of sleepy, and then you can reinforce it with the whatever training that you normally do with that on top of it.
So if people want to learn how to be able to properly assess what's going on and then provide the correct intervention, what would you recommend like people to where to start, like, and how to do it to acquire that skill?
Oh man. So there's a lot of answers for this one. Because it really depends on how you think and how you assess, right? Like if you're one of those people who need to do clinical assessments, TheraPlay is probably not the best modality for you, because if you can't see movement, you can't see lines, then clinical assessment is probably the better way to go, right? But the things with TheraPlay, you need to either already know or know how to develop, or just start being able to develop it. Just it's more of the overall what's happening versus the what's happening joint by joint. And so a lot of that takes practice. And you can also get guidance with the practice, right? So if you can find a mentor that can help you with that guidance, that's always a great thing. If you can find multiple mentors that can help you with the guidance, that's even better, because everybody has different views of the same thing. We teach that in our TheraPlay courses as well. So if it's something that you're interested in, I'm like, shameless plug, we can arrange a course, right? And then we can, have a course, and then I can teach you all those ways and those kind of things. That as well. The way that I developed it as a base for myself, because I didn't come from any formal background of assessments or anything. I kind of developed it myself and then started picking up various analytical approaches along the way. But the biggest and most helpful way that I found for myself and for some other people as well is to literally just start watching people move. You watch people move, you pay attention, and then you start comparing and contrasting. And you can start with something as simple as walking, right? When people are walking, you just sit there and you watch them walk. You watch that person you watch that person walk, and see what's different between that person and that person. Does that person move more side to side? Does that person rotate more? Does that person not move that left hip enough? Does that person not swing their arms enough? Is that person, their head do something weird? I don't know. But you basically just start from noticing what is different, right? What's different, and then we'll worry about the specifics of it different later. But the first things first, you need to be able to see that something is different in general. And that, I think, is probably the most important part of an assessment, is just being able to notice that something is different. What that difference is, that's debatable. I've had rooms full of like 30 to 40 really good therapists, doctors, MDs, whatever, in the same room. And we'll have one person walking up and down it, and half of the room will say, oh, too much left thoracic rotation. And then the other side will say, nope, too much right thoracic rotation. And it's like, everybody's like, no, we're right. No, we're right. And they're seeing the same person, right? But they all have different opinions on what's actually happening. So in my mind, you can label it whatever you want, but the most important thing is that you see that there's something different than what's supposed to happen. So that's kind of like where I would start.
And then too, on that, you kind of mentioned before when we were talking about like your approach is a little bit different. And this is what kind of reminded me of square one is you want to try to avoid taking like a spray and kind of pray that it works type of approach. You kind of want to expand on that and how you kind of have a way to kind of get to the root of what's going on, and not just be like, oh, I see that their head, they don't have rotation this way, and so let's just do a bunch of like mobility exercises going this way, and hope that works. Oh, after like 12 weeks, it didn't work. All right, let's like reassess and try something different. So do you have like, how do you avoid that? Like, we're just throwing a whole bunch of different things at it and hoping that one of those things that I threw at it takes care of it.
That comes in the history and the assessment For sure. So if the more history you have on somebody, the more clues that you'll have into like looking into their personal window of how their body is working and operating, right? So learning how to take a really good history is extremely important. And actually in one of my courses, I teach, like, it's a scoliosis course, but because scoliosis is one of the, if not the most difficult things for physical therapists to treat right now. Like, they don't have any answers for it. And I believe it's because they're trying to look for one answer for it. And it's not one answer. It's different for everybody. And the reason why my students and I have been very successful with the scoliosis cases is because they've learned how to take a really good history. So if you get a good history, if you know how to take the history, if you know what kind of questions to ask and how to ask the questions, you can get the clues that you need to figure out what's going on in that person, or have a better chance of figuring out what's actually going on with that person. The other one is the assessment, right? So like in TheraPlay, we're not doing much of the history taking in TheraPlay. It's more of just like, hey, surprise, you're fixed. Surprise, I assess you and we play some games and you now feel better, cool. And so that's more based on the visual assessment and noticing like how they're moving, how they're not moving, and that type of thing. So just because someone presents with a neck problem where their neck doesn't move in a specific way, doesn't mean that they have a neck problem. Like the neck could just be a symptom of something else, right? Like we talked about, like the sprained ankle thing. So if we're able to look at the entire body and look at different movements like that, then we can actually do a better job of assessing to see where things are starting from and where things are ending. Like what's being compensated for. What's doing the compensation, where they're lacking, where they're afraid to go into, what spaces they're not comfortable moving into, and then why. So I think those would be the two main ways to not take a spray and pray move, but be able to have more of like a pinpoint. Okay, we're going to use this thing, and then I think this is probably going to work really well for you. Instead of like, let's just try 20 different things and then see what happens. So.
What's your thought on using muscle testing? Because I know people are kind of apprehensive, about, is that super subjective? Like, how objective is it? What's kind of your take on it? And then even using that as an assessment tool to take more of a targeted approach to try to find the source of like what's going on.
For sure. Muscle testing is one of those things where it is a skilled modality, meaning that you have to have a lot of practice in order to do it properly. So it'd be kind of like, we could compare it to like surgery, right? Surgery technically is just cutting something open, doing something inside, and then sewing it back up, right? And so you can have a really shitty surgeon who does a really shitty job, and that's still considered surgery, right? Like they make the joke of like, yeah, what's the difference between the doctor who graduated Harvard with an A, with a 4.0 GPA versus like a 2.0 GPA? Nothing. They both graduated with the same degree at the same place. One did better and the other one didn't do as well, but they're both doctors. They both have the same title, right? So now we're just looking at how much practice and quality of work and their attention with the work that they do. So muscle testing is one of those things, and there's different types of muscle testing as well too. So NKT does a very different type of muscle testing than something like Kendall and Kendall, and they're looking for different things as well too. So depending on how you refine your muscle testing and what you're actually testing for and your intentions with that, let's say all that is good. I think muscle testing can be a very good tool to use. That being said, there's other intricacies with muscle testing that need to be considered, and a lot of it is on self-care. Because if you are not in a good state of being for some reason or another, your muscle testing can be very off. And so keeping yourself healthy in mind, body, and spirit, and energy, and all the things is actually really important if you want to practice good muscle testing. But I think muscle testing can be really good, but also in a movement or exercise environment. Let's say someone's doing like personal training or things like that, and then their trainer wants them to, do some muscle testing, right? So they do some muscle testing, but it takes up like half of their training session. Well, if I was a client, I'd be pissed. I'm like, I'm here to work out. I'm not here to lay on a table and just do some muscle testing. I'm here to work out. Like, I'm not sweating at all. I'm not doing anything. This is really frustrating, right? And so in that sense, TheraPlay would be very appropriate to just kind of incorporate into the workout so that they're still getting physical activity, but you still get to assess and treat. However, in a more clinical setting, muscle testing, more time for muscle testing is more appropriate because that's what's expected, right? But you can also have muscle testing for like a short amount of time for the exercise environment as well too. You just kind of make sure that you limit it. But anytime that you're limiting time, you need to make sure that you're really like on your game with that type of modality. So it's kind of a give and take. It's the same thing. It's a tool. If you know how to use it, and how do you use it? How well do you know how to use it in those ways? How much are you going to use it? What type of environment are you going to use it? What are you using it for? Same thing.
Gotcha. Well, I know we said about an hour, so Robert, you got anything to wrap on that you would like to ask that came up while we were chatting there?
No, I think it was very well wrapped up, and there's a lot of good information in there.
Cool.
Yeah. So usually what we do when we bring it to a close, do you have any resources that you'd recommend for people? And they don't have to necessarily be baseball oriented or, health and wellness. It could just be anything that you would recommend for people to look into, to check out. Yeah.
Oh man, this is also a loaded question. There's so many ways we can go with this. I mean, any of the courses that I've mentioned were obviously ones that kind of stuck out to me and were a little bit more influential. I welcome anybody to reach out to me as well if they have any questions or want to discuss things or whatnot. My Instagram, I think you might be able to see it here, but Instagram is strength_therapy. You can also find me on Facebook, Strength Therapy. And then any of my courses as well. I mean, shameless plug, right? But any of my courses as well on my website is strength-therapy.com. If anybody wants to like host any type of courses that I teach or have any special requests, just reach out to me as well. Other resources, I mean, there's a lot of books and things too. You could go on forever with various types of books. But
do you have a favorite one that you really like that was most influential for you? And if that's too hard of a question, recently.
Oh man, there's a lot of really good books. I mean, I think Stuart Brown's Play book is pretty good. If anybody's interested in Parkinson's and play, I wrote a chapter of play and how you can use play to decrease the symptoms of Parkinson's. And that one is, I think it's called like Regenerative Training by Karl Sterling. And that one is also a fantastic book, actually, because there's a whole bunch of people that have contributed to that. I mean, I always think Perry's stuff is pretty good. The NKT stuff, I think, is also good. There's I mean, the EMP, Rafe stuff, all the stuff that I've mentioned before. But books, there's so many, and I just kind of like take a little bit from each thing. So sorry, that not very good at answering that question.
No, but you threw out a really good one. What was that one? The book on play.
Play, yeah, it's called Play. It's by
perfect.
Yeah, it's just called Play, and I think it's by Stuart Brown. Katie Bowman has some good books out there as well too. More on like movement nutrition and that type of thing. So I think those are some pretty good ones too. A lot of them are very fundamental, but I think the fundamentals are extremely important. And I think people need to revisit the fundamentals once in a while anyway. So I think, yeah, those are good things.
Yeah. And to kind of wrap, I think players spend so much time trying to keep themselves healthy. They do all these mobility exercises. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I think, to me, the play stuff is another way to stay healthy and you actually enjoy it and you want to do it. I think that's part of the reason why I think, guys get burned out or, they do all this stuff and they're like, well, why isn't it working? Like that can be kind of hard. And so I think especially for coaches, to get more buy-in, to have your guys healthier, to incorporate play, into what you're doing to have guys move in a bunch of different ranges of motion. And, it's going to be extremely beneficial to keep guys healthy. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. This has been awesome.